Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
And you're welcome along to Wednesday Night Rugby. I just got a chilling tweet from somebody whose Spotify had detailed their listening across the year, and he'd done well over 1,000 minutes of Monday and Wednesday Night Rugby, which is, I think, worthy of an intervention of sorts. So thanks for that tweet. Gerry Thornley of the Irish Times with us. Hello.
Very good, Joe. That person deserves a medal.
I know, yeah. Keith Wood. That's a lot of Keith Wood over the year. Hello.
Too much, without a shadow of a doubt. There's only so much you can take, you know.
There we are. So, Gerry, the Munster latest 34 players and staff have arrived home this evening, and then, as I understand it, I'm sure you're across the detail, 14 remain, a combination of positive cases and close contacts.
Correct, yeah. They, I believe they were changing their plans pretty much on the hour, every hour. They've gone through 4 rounds of PCR tests in a 6-day period. And the main thing was just getting people out of there as quickly as they could. And they've managed to extricate 34 people. I believe they went in 2 parts in Amsterdam. And the 14 who are remaining, they're in the care of 2 liaison officers. Again, whatever medical attention or advice they need. And I'm also told that rather helpfully they each have their own balconies, which must be some light relief. Otherwise, imagine being inside 4 walls with COVID in South Africa and Cape Town in a hotel in isolation would be fairly grim. Yeah,
I'm sure a fairly shell-shocked bunch. I don't know how you've been talking to or what your contacts are saying.
Well, yeah, as you can imagine, in a 48 strong travelling party, and when events like this happen, they were due to fly home. The game's cancelled on Friday. They go to Cape Town on Saturday. They go to the airport on Sunday. But one positive case means that after a 9-hour wait in the hotel, they can't get on the flight to Dublin with the Scarlets and Zebra squads and have to remain on in Cape Town in their hotel in isolation in their rooms, pending more rounds of tests, which revealed a further 4 cases, then another 9 on Tuesday before they finally flew out yesterday and got home today. I'd say it's been, for some would have handled obviously much better than others. Some would have kept their spirits up better than others, I'm sure. It must have been particularly difficult for those with families, young families at home, stressful time for them as well. So first and foremost, it's a human story. Sometimes when you get lost in rugby and, what the implications might be for Heineken Champions Cup fixtures like that, first and foremost, it's a human story.
Yeah. Very stressful, Keith. These are the times, unfortunately, we're living in.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly stressful. When we were looking back at this about 18 months ago or whatever it was when COVID started, we had discussions over how do you deal with it? How do you deal with not being able to train, because it's very hard when you're an elite sportsman. But actually what they've been doing ever since is been trying to work inside some level of a bubble constantly so that they can get out and play a match. And it was really interesting watching full stadia over the last few weeks, and now it looks like there's a bit of a manoeuvre away from that again. And this risk was forever hanging over them. So I think it's an incredibly stressful period of time to do it. And it's funny because we were watching a couple of different elements of if you don't get to play and if you're out for a long period of time, like we're used to that with people getting injured as individuals, but when you've hold amateur teams that were out for sort of 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9 months, makes it very hard for them to get it back. You've had professional sport trying to deal with it in that period of time. I think it's been incredibly stressful. I think at times some of the critiques that have happened in relation to the standards that have been played have never used that COVID lens for it. But this spectre, I suppose, of contracting COVID is there constantly. And I don't know the circumstances under how they got it, but 14 of the squad that are stuck down there. There's a load that have come back today. There is a load at home. Now they're trying to get their head around preparing for it. So yes, they're dealing with a disease, but they're also dealing with their livelihood, and there's a high responsibility for that too. So it's pretty stressful all around, I think.
Gerry, with the view to the 14 who are remaining, with the view to the 34 who have returned, and that's players and staff, EPCR seem absolutely adamant that the Heineken Champions Cup matches will go ahead one way or another. They won't be postponed. I mean, I'm sure Munster could forfeit if they wanted, and we'd see those 28-0, those dreaded 28-0 scorelines again. But They will go ahead as planned. So from a Munster perspective, Wasps on the 12th of December, a Sunday away. Now, even of the players who arrive back this evening, if they go in for their 10 days and say the clock even starts at midnight, they'd be looking at a Sunday morning flight over to Coventry and trying to play a game that Sunday with virtually no training behind them. So I think we're safely writing off any of the squad who were in South Africa these past few days for that Heineken Champions Cup game.
I would have tended to agree, although I'm hearing that Munster will not rule out that possibility. We can be sure of one thing from Munster: they will move hell or high water to make sure that they take part in this first game of the Heineken Champions Cup away to Wasps, because it's, the Heineken Cup is European rugby, such an integral part of their DNA. They're so inextricably linked with this competition. They will do their damnedest to try and field a team, however much that will take. So I wouldn't necessarily entirely rule out the possibility of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, whatever it might be, if that was required to fulfill this fixture, being included in that travelling party, travelling over the morning of the match. I wouldn't rule it out, Joe. They will be training their own gyms and their own locations as best they can over the next 10 days. But you're right. I would have thought the more likely scenario for this game to go ahead would be that they've got 58 registered players on the EPCR website, and we can rule out all the 34 players who went to South Africa on the basis of what you just said. If we do rule them out, of those who remaining at home or registered, I understand that only 15 have been in training, but there's been 9 on the injured list, or one case, Conor Phillips has been over, the academy winger has been over the Irish Sevens in Dubai. So there's only been 15 players registered training under Ian Costo, the academy manager in the High Performance Centre in the University of Limerick. Clearly, therefore, they would need to be allowed to supplement those 15 with additionally registered players. The word from EPCR is there will be no special dispensation for Munster or indeed Cardiff, who host Toulouse on Saturday week, or the Scarlets who are away to Bristol on Saturday week, that there would have to be a blanket rule change, most probably, for additional players to be registered, so that this would apply across the board for all participating clubs. And this in turn would require all the EPCR stakeholders, i.e. the top 14 clubs in France and the Premiership clubs, to sanction such a blanket rule change between now and then. There is some sympathy for Munster, certainly in Wasps, who, their coach Lee Blackett talked about how their preparations for the Premiership final against Exeter last October were so disrupted by, I think, 11 positive cases in their camp, and they had to field a week inside at short notice. So remains to be seen whether there will be this blanket rule change allowing them to supplement their players. They have been training with well over 20 players, I believe, with new additions to their academy, young players within the system, so that they could be potentially added to it. But I think that is the much likelier route than, as you outlined, supplementing the 15 players who are training in Limerick at the moment with some of those who have landed today in Dublin and are making their way back to Limerick and Cork this evening.
Yeah. Your line is just misbehaving a touch, so we'll get you back on a better line in a second, Gerry. Keith, Rory O'Connor in the Irish Independent, he looked at who's travelled and who's left and where we are. He took a stab at the Munster team that we might see in Coventry. So there are big names available, absolutely. Andrew Conway for one, Keith Earls, Damien Diolande, Joey Carberry, Conor Murray, Dave Kilcoyne, Tyke Byrne, Peter O'Mahony can all pitch up and start that game. The less big names, we would be looking at players like Jonathan Wren with a debut at fullback. Gerry mentioned Conor Phillips there, who's on sevens duty. He'd be making his debut as well. Not European debut here, Munster debut. He'd be making his debut on the wing. There would be a debut as well for Daniel Okeke at number 8. Keane Hurley would be making his second ever appearance at 6. Owen O'Connor would be making his debut in the second row. And then you'd have 2 debutants in Declan Moore and Mark Donnelly in the front row. So debutants all round there, really, of the less big names, the academy players. I don't know. I mean, people have made the point it would be a very Munster thing for them to go and have a famous day in Coventry, but it's not ideal.
No, it's not ideal, but it is what we're having to deal with. So that's, I think that's a fair call. If I go back, it's 22 years ago when we lost in Lens with Ireland. Munster played Leinster about 6 or 7 days later, and Declan Kidney had said, turn up the morning of the match and decide whether you want to play or not. It's up to you. And we all decided to play. We didn't do any training. We did nothing whatsoever in that intervening period of time. We went out and we played well, and we beat Leinster, which was great. So I think it depends on a case-by-case basis. Some players would be able to deal with that and be able to turn up and perform if they're home, if they are through quarantine and isolation and they are fit to play. Now, I would say if they're allowed to train during that quarantine period of time, whatever training that is and whatever structure they can get. But I do think you can get those players to go and do it. You have to be mindful of player welfare and the safety of both those players who may not have been able to train as much, but also those players who have not been at that level before. You don't want to pick them because you have to pick them. You have to be confident that they're ready to be picked, and that it's safe to pick them. Look, I think they'll get a combination of the players that are based at home. You might have a couple of young fellas that are coming through, and I think you'll end up with a few players that have not done a huge amount of training, not ideal preparation, but they will be able to do a huge amount on Zoom. They will go through whatever it is they're going to try and go through. It will not be perfect for a perfect performance, but it may be what they have to go and do.
Yeah, look, we're past, I think at the moment, we're past the point of looking for perfection. Get on, do what you can. That's the world we're living in. So we'll see what happens. I mean, geez, I wasn't saying the word Omicron too often until about 48 hours ago. So 10 days away is an eternity right now. Let's go to more solid footing then. Leinster against Connacht, Friday night, 7:45. I think everybody's looking forward to this, Keith. Two teams coming at this from fairly different perspectives at the weekend.
Look, absolutely. Well, Connacht playing in the coldest weather of all time, and getting a cracking result, and Leinster Ulster, which was an incredibly strange game of rugby actually, and interesting for how both the sides went about it. I thought, they're both heavily depleted, but it just looked like Ulster kept a better focus. But they didn't try a huge amount, and it was very different, vastly different from the rugby we'd seen from Ireland over the autumn. There was a lot of one-out runners from both sides. It was a bit of a slugfest. It was windy, and that made it a bit awkward. But I just thought Leinster seemed to get a bit unstuck. The amount of unforced errors is not something that you're used to seeing from Leinster, and the care and attention that they had around ruck ball was very average for them. So Ulster absolutely deserved the win. They were. I think it flattered them at the end because Leinster pushed it that one pass too many. Don't shovel shit, as they say. And one of those passes that went at the very end was a guy caught in contact and still thought he could make the pass that was on 3 seconds previously. It never ever is on after that sort of time. So I think it becomes very interesting because it's what are Leinster going to do? How are they going to perform? How angry are they on the back of a pretty subpar performance for them? Yeah.
They're second of the season because they were very subpar against Dragons as well, and Leo Cullen had some strong words. He didn't deliver them with any great anger, but he was just saying for a bunch of the guys who've played, that's their opportunity, and they may not get another one, in effect, was what he was saying. But that is two very iffy Leinster performances thus far in the season, 6 games in.
Yeah, I have huge sympathy for all the guys. If we go back to the conversation we were having earlier of people being infected, there is a disruption to every single thing that they're doing during the season. Like there's no flow to the season as it stands, and not just from the ordinary run of matches that we would have. It's having to have a counterbalance to COVID pretty much in every single thing that you do. So I think it's hard. I think a lot of players are under pressure. I think much and all, as Leo said, that this may be their one opportunity. Those players know that. They know that there's a chunk of Irish players coming back from camp who are going to be flying it when they get the chance. And this may be their only chance to put their hand up to say, pick me. And like we've had this over young players in the past, what you want them to do is to play well, not to be extraordinary standout performer. You want them to do the skills that are required of them and do it very well, nicely, but not be the total star in the field. So, like, I felt for some of the players. I felt for Harry Byrne, because he's had a huge emotional high for playing in some big international match 2 weeks ago, to come off the bench and want everything to go right for him, and a few things didn't go right for him. That happens. That's fine. But he's trying to have to deal with an entirely different emotion than he was a couple of weeks ago.
And I suppose if you're looking for some would say reasons, you can say excuses, whichever you prefer, but the fringe players around Leinster in particular now just not getting the game time they would have had previously. Even Gordon Darcy today made the point in the Irish Times. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. Harry Byrne for Leinster, leave the Argentina game aside, has had less than 40 minutes, and that is the curtailed URC season that we all live in now. So a lot of these players are really getting very little rugby at the moment.
Well, if we have the curtailed season as it sits, you really want to see those guys play rugby at AIL level. They have to play rugby. The idea of being a rugby player is to get on the field. It isn't to train for 9 months of the year or 3 or 4 months of the year and only play 40 minutes. Like, that's a very hard place to be. I mean, emotionally, that's an incredibly difficult place to be. I used to often, think about it when I was in Quins, where you'd see players who were on the outer reaches of the squad, and they were having to do a huge amount of grunt work, day in, day out, week in, week out, and rarely getting the opportunity to don the jersey in a meaningful match. That's a hard place to be, It's very tough. And like Gerry mentioned, 56 players in Munster. Like, that's a crazy number.
I know. I do wonder if it will come down. Like, even you take Byrne and he came on and there was a kick out in the full. He was outside the 22, and then we mentioned it on Monday, so not to labour the point, but he kicked out in the full with Adam Byrne outside him when he was kind of around the corner in the fringes. And I think in the 77th minute there was a pass dropped, not the most sympathetic pass. Maybe the line was overrun by the intended receiver. But regardless, it didn't go well for him. It was just one of those days. He's a young player, he's finding his feet, and he got his 15 minutes plus out of time, so 40 minutes, and here we are December the 1st for Leinster. I mean, if you're Andy Farrell looking at that, Keith, there is a degree whereby I have a feeling this guy could be something for me in 2023. I mean, I can't give him enough minutes in a green jersey to get him up to speed. He needs to be playing a lot more rugby. That's a very difficult problem, because Ross Byrne's not relinquishing the jersey and is a more solid option for Leinster right now. For instance, away to Bath for the first round of European action, where this is a sprint finish now in the group stages. I mean, if you're Leo Cullen, you probably are going with Ross Byrne. Does Johnny Sexton come back for the Montpellier game? It's a possibility. But again, you're possibly going with Ross Byrne again. And suddenly you're into Interpros at Christmas, and Harry Byrne has less than 80 minutes rugby in him. And like I said, if I'm Andy Farrell, I don't like those numbers at all. These are wasted semesters.
Well, look, I think that's a great point and a valid point. And it's funny, a lot of people have said they don't understand a lot of the conversation and chat over Harry Byrne. Well, a lot of the coaches, both in Leinster and in Ireland, have seen something in him that they think he's got a very high ceiling, and they think he has a higher ceiling than his brother. So makes for interesting conversation over dinner time. But it also means that he may get more chances with it. And I know we had this discussion about some of the players who were low on confidence going into the autumn matches, and Joey Carberry in particular. And would going into the Irish camp make a difference to them, or would their lack of confidence and his lack of confidence show up? Well, it didn't show up. He actually grew in confidence as the autumn went on, and I think an awful lot of players have commented on how much they loved and enjoyed that period of time in camp. Now, that's a change of scenery, it's a change of leadership, and it's a different style of leadership to what all of these players are used to in their home provinces. So I don't know. I think if Farrell thinks that this is a really good thing and he likes him and thinks he is a guy for the future, he'll persevere with him. And he'll say, well, we'll have to do enough when we're in camp to get the best out of him and to bring him along. But I would still say I would want to see Harry Byrne playing as much rugby as he possibly can. And if he can't play that at European level or interprovincial level, well, then he should be playing more matches at AIL level, because you just need to learn how to do things at different times. And these guys have been starved of an awful lot of rugby. They need to play rugby.
Yeah. Gerry, I think you're back with us.
Yep, I am.
You just joined us. We were touching on the Leinster-Ulster game and Harry Byrne came up, and Gordon Darcy made the point in the paper this afternoon that Byrne has 40 minutes played for Leinster, and here we are December 1st, almost as many minutes in the green shirt. And if you're Andy Farrell hoping this guy is the one for the World Cup, he's not getting the minutes at club level that will get him up to speed, or the speed required, you suspect, for a World Cup. So this is increasingly a dilemma as Ross Byrne continues to do a very solid job for Leinster.
Yeah, it's been a very stop-start career for the 22-year-old Harry Byrne thus far. Last season, even, he's going to be given his European bow against Northampton. He got injured in the warm-up. He's been injured early in other games against Munster. He had one run out against Zebra, and he was injured after 22 minutes. And then he went into the Ulster game with just 22 minutes rugby under his belt for Leinster this season. And that contributed to him trying to force things a little bit, and also given the nature of the game, and it was on a knife edge. And he has that propensity. He's more exciting than Ross, but he's not as reliable as Ross. And he tries things. He's been doing that in his under 20 days. And when they come off, he looks like a world beater, no doubt about it. I agree totally with Keith. He needs more rugby. It's been very unfortunate for a lot of these young, talented players. The same with Jack Crowley in Munster. They just played so little rugby since the outbreak of this pandemic. Jack Crowley's played a tiny amount of rugby, even less than Harry Byrne. And then you think of Keith mentioning the AIL and what a great experience that would be for these players. Jack Crowley has been playing, albeit sometimes a full back for Cork Con, and he's been playing a bit for Gary Owen at that half. The more game time, the better in the AIL, the better, I think. That's how Ronan O'Gara cut his teeth with Cork Con as well. I know there was different times, but Harry Byrne desperately needs more minutes on the pitch. I do think there's a huge talent there. I agree with Keith, Stuart Lancaster, Mike Catt, Andy Farrell, Leo Cullen. They're not bad judges of players, and they see something clearly in Harry Byrne but that will only come to fruition with more game time. It's the position, O'Gara has always said it, that takes almost the longest to learn, isn't it? That the more experience you have in that role, the better. It's you've got to earn your stripes in that position. It comes with experience. You learn from your mistakes. Very few are the Dan Carter, the Johnny Wilkins of this world, just take to test rugby in their kind of late teens, early 20s. Yeah.
What of the game itself on Saturday? So for Ulster, very positive, and then for Leinster, well, obviously negative. There's a degree, though, to dismiss those results as little mini bumps in the road, missing a lot of players, ultimately won't be long remembered come the business end of the season, or do you detect something a bit more worrying?
Well, there's been a pattern so far this season, and that is that, first up in an Irish provincial derby, teams have come unstuck. It happened to Ulster when they met Connacht. Connacht had the benefit of a derby the week before against Munster and ran them close. Was still sore from that and came out and did a number in Ulster. Ulster had 4 or 5 weeks to stew over that before they played Leinster. And as Leo Cullen said afterwards, this was a reminder to his team that the interpros are just different gravy. There's just an awful lot of different factors at work, particularly when you factor in 4 ex-Leinster men in the Ulster starting team, a couple more on the bench. Greg Jones from St Andrews, you recall running around as a kid, how important that was for him, scoring that try in front of his parents on the ground. The same with Nick Timney, had a huge match, and John Cooney just back for the point to prove he was very feisty and up for the game and adhering to it. It was quite a strictly limited kind of Ulster game plan designed for the night that was in it. Anytime they were just inside their own half, John Cooney did the box kick into just outside the 22, and they didn't take any risks on the ball. They didn't risk turning it over too much. It was a lot of one-off runners. They didn't get to the edge very often. In actual fact, Leinster, on the few chances they had in the first half, I thought looked a better attacking team. There was more variety to what they were doing. There was a bit more offloading. There was more tip-on passes. There was, they varied the point of attack, but they didn't get the edges too often themselves. And particularly in the second half, I thought Ulster adapted really well defensively. They were using shooters, coming up hard on the outside, cutting off that outside edge that Leinster like to get to build their game on. And it was just a very well, Keith said, focused performance. They had a game plan. They stuck to it. And overall, you have to say they probably had that bit more desire. They certainly had that bit more accuracy in a more restricted way than Leinster, epitomised by Harry Byrne. They just try to push things a bit more and were unusually wasteful in possession, forcing passes, forcing kicks, and Then, of course, the dominant theme of the game was Frank Murphy's interpretation of the breakdown. It heavily favoured the jackal, even when sometimes the tackle player had to roll away. He still rewarded the jackal. I think the penalty count was 15-11 in Ulster's favour. It was a constant narrative throughout the game. And with Leinster not resourcing their breakdown as well as they might have done, it probably hurt them more than anything else.
With a view to Friday then, Gerry, we'll see a very different way of trying to skin the cat from Connacht. They will not be conservative. They will go and approach this game in entirely the opposite way. And if you might be innately conservative and think, oh, well, that's where they'll come unstuck against Leinster perhaps. They did score 35 points there at the RDS last January and won the game. So this will be every bit as competitive as Saturday just gone, but I would hope a damn sight better game. Yeah,
I would have thought so. They've nailed their colours to the mast, Connacht, the way they want to play rugby, and they've shown it in the bonus point wins against the Bulls, against Ulster and against the Ospreys, even when the wild west weather was coming in from the Atlantic and the posts were tilted and the rain was slanting down and the wind was blowing up a gale. They just still went on playing rugby. It was like watching the Auckland Blues, you know what I mean, in Eden Park, and it went wintry night in Auckland. Conditions didn't bother them. They just went for it, and they've got. I've been really struck by them, the improvements they've made this season in their launch plays, Joe. Even in the bad day against the Dragons when they lost at home, their launch plays are incredible. The variety of what they're doing off lineouts and scrums to get over the gain line or even come up with strike plays, and then what they're doing in open play as well, the shape of the attack. And they've improved their defence as well, much more line speed. And amazingly against Munster, they were winning the collisions at Thornley Park as well. And that was a big feature of what happened to Leinster last Friday night in the RDS. They lost a lot of the collisions. More often than not, they lost collisions to Ulster. I can't imagine that's going to happen again. I would have thought Leinster now will be smart and there'll be a rebound. They would welcome back a cohort of their frontline internationals, and it's going to be a full-on game because Leinster got every motivation in the world. They've felt they've disappointed their home fans. They've lost at home. They lost an Irish derby, and they get an Irish derby, albeit with a 6-day turnaround, in front of their own fans again, and also against a team who beat them in the RDS last season. So I think there's going to be a very motivated Leinster side coming into Europe, and it'll be a belter again. Yeah,
no James Ryan, no Johnny Sexton, no Bundy Aki either. Relentless, fast, adaptable. Keith, you cannot listen to an Andy Friend interview at the moment without him saying relentless, fast, adaptable. These are the three words they have anchored their season on: being relentless, on being fast, and being adaptable. More ball and play time as well, he was saying to us a couple of weeks ago, is something they strive to do at the start of the season. I'm curious for your thoughts on, I can't work out if the new shape of the season suits a Connacht or hurts them. It certainly hurts them in the sense that it's much harder for them to get into Europe, such are the vagaries of qualification. On the other hand, they've had however many weeks rest during the November internationals as opposed to playing games and being on the road. Like, they can pitch up for a lot of games now and go full strength and really give it their all. So I don't know, we're watching it develop, and we'll see maybe at the end of the season or after a season or two, but there are aspects to this which suit the smaller squad of Connacht.
Yeah, I don't think it suits Connacht too much, because when they won the Pro 14 a few years ago, they pretty much cleaned up in all the international windows, and any of those matches that were on while other teams had players away, they had precious few away. Yeah. And they managed to gain ground very quickly and held on to it at the end. I didn't expect Connacht to win that year. I just thought this was one of those crazy rides that you see, and they're going to fall off at some stage near the end. But they managed to keep the energy to get over the line at the very end, which was something. So, but I think this team is more mature than it was. I do think that Lamb put in a really good shift with them and changed the mindset of Connacht, but I think Friend has done a particularly good job. And he is not always effusive in his praise. He's quite critical. He's incredibly supportive. He's bought into the idea of a little bit of the much maligned and chip in the shoulder and underappreciated Connacht. And he uses that and plays that very, very well, actually. And yet, in the midst of that, they're playing a style that you'd pay to watch. And that's something that is, I think, over any of the teams in Ireland. I think if you look at the teams in England, partly because of the huge fillip for them of not having a relegation, was that the English teams have decided to have a cut an awful lot more and embrace the idea of a bit more entertainment in terms of their rugby. Connacht are all over that and have been for years.
Yeah.
They just seem to be putting it all together at the moment.
Yeah, and I was talking to him recently, and there was an interesting point in it, Keith, whereby instinctively you might think, well, with all that weather coming in off the Atlantic coast, you would be more inclined to play a more conservative brand of rugby. And yet Andy Friend made the very sensible point that, well, if it's howling a gale, they're not the best conditions to kick in. So passing shorter passes is often the best way to build an attack with some kind of coherence. And I thought, I never looked at it that way. And I was thinking of the Donegal Gaelic footballers, renowned for a short hand passing game. And again, it's put down to those windy conditions are not suited to perfecting a long kicking game. So I thought that was a kind of interesting way to look at the wind and how they go about their business. Perversely, it's more suited to the wind as opposed to throwing that ball up in the air and kicking it a mile.
Well, it's very disruptive thinking to kind of flip everything that we would have been taught as kids and all the way up, that's what you do. And bearing in mind that they play in the showgrounds every couple of weeks, it's a very, very tough place to play. I do remember playing a match there where I did not step in the Connacht half once in one half of the game because we were playing into the wind. We couldn't get out of our half, quite literally. So you use that as a backdrop. Yeah, provided you have the confidence and the skill level, which Connacht have been working on for 6 or 7 years now, that they are comfortable with that idea which we would have described as being risky in the past. It's not risky because everybody's expecting it. It's much easier to run into the wind than it is to kick into the wind. So I think it's a fair point. But look, it requires huge confidence. It requires players following what a coach is saying. It requires a coach understanding that the executive have his back and are willing to back this style. But like if you're looking at any team on these islands in the last 10 or 15 years, and the teams that have been growing the most, Connacht is one of those. It's in terms of entertainment value, building a followership. I mean, they're doing the job and they're doing it bloody well.
They are. Gerry, do you agree with Keith, by the way, that the new format doesn't really suit Connacht at all? I accepted when I asked the question that qualification for Europe is harder. I'm more talking in terms of the number of games.
Yeah, well, in the number of games, yes, perhaps they don't have the strength and depth of Leinster, who can cope with these windows. In the past, they could have coped with these windows when there was games during November in the Six Nations. That's often when Leinster did so well as well, because it was a test of everybody's strength and depth. And I think they've been slightly disadvantaged by the new format, which has these long hiatuses during November and just 2 games during the Six Nations when there might have been 4. But I agree totally with Keith. I remember that year that Connacht won the Pro 12 vividly, and they had fantastic winning runs at the start of the season when there was a World Cup on, and then again they revived their season during the Six Nations, and they weren't distracted by prolonged involvement in Europe. I think they made the Challenge Cup quarterfinals, and it was almost a blessing in disguise for them when they were beaten away by Grenoble in what was one of the games of the season. But it's a hugely disadvantage to them in lots of other ways, and you're right, like they get Leinster, Ulster and Munster are the 3 leaders in the league, effectively. Okay, the table says otherwise now because Munster's game was called off the weekend and Edinburgh have gone up to 3rd. But Connacht have to play each of them twice. They only get to play Zebra once, whereas they're real rivals around them in terms of qualifying for the playoffs and for the European Cup next season, the likes of Edinburgh and the Ospreys and Glasgow, and then all get to play Zebra twice. So there's a lot of inbuilt disadvantages. It's not an equitable league. It's not a 16 teams each playing 30 games, 15 at home, 15 away. And it has probably disadvantaged Connacht, I think, this format more than anything. But I think that's also galvanised them. I think they're aware of this. They're determined not to let the other 3 Irish provinces drift away into the sunlight, away from them. They're going to stay in touch like a dog with a bone. And Andy Friend is of the view that if they finish 4th in the Irish table, that's it. They don't make the Heineken Champions Cup. I would have thought if they get 6th or 7th, they've still got a great chance of both making the playoffs and the Champions Cup. And the way they're playing, I wouldn't rule it out, because the other thing they've done very well is they've recruited so excellently. They can't shop in, Brown Thomas for the World Cup winning South African forwards like Dwayne Vermeulen, R.G. Snyman or Damien Diende. They sign players like Mac Hansen, who turned out to be, and more often than not, he hits. Connacht have a very good record of these signings under Andy Friend, And they've strengthened their squad quite well when you think of the midfield and the damage been done there, and yet they can still perform as they did in the last game with 3 missing centres, including Bundyaki. So they have a bit of depth there as well that they haven't had before, and they've tightened up Achilles' heels, like the line-out defensive maul cost them a lot of points last season, and it was a real Achilles' heel. They've strengthened that up. So they've been, I think, almost, even though they're down in 6th place in the table, I think they've almost been the story of the season in some respects so far.
Yeah, well, Friday night, 7:45 kickoff, should be a great game. Ulster, we had Darren Cave on Monday's Night Rugby chat, if you want to listen back to that. They're away to Ospreys on the Saturday. Our rugby coverage with thanks to Vodafone, sponsors of the Irish rugby team of us, everyone in. A pleasure to chat to two men who do shop in Brent Thomas. Gerry Thornley, thank you.
Cheers, thanks, Joe.
Keith Wood, thank you.
Cheers, Joe. Mind yourself.
All right.
Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.